Hello everyone and welcome to a game commentary from round 8 of the Altibox Norway Chess. Magnus Carlsen was leading the field heading into this round, and he had the opportunity to win the event with a round to spare if he defeats the Chinese player Yu Yangyi. So Magnus had white pieces in this game, and without further ado, let's jump right into it. So Magnus opened with d4, d5 from Yu, c4 and c6, the Slav defense. Knight f3, knight f6, knight c3. So one could play solidly with pawn to e6 here, but Yu decides to sharpen things up. He plays d takes c4, Magnus played e4 and here b5. And this is the modern Geller Gambit line of the Slav defense. Carlsen played bishop e2 and here b4. This move has been played before, but not at the elite level. Perhaps Yu was trying to catch Magnus off guard, and I'm guessing this surprised Magnus as he spent a good 5 minutes for his next move. Magnus played pawn to e5. He could also play knight to a4. This gives up another pawn. Bishop takes c4. This is playable. White's lead in development compensates for the pawn, but Magnus opted for e5. We have b takes c3, e takes f6, and here e takes f6. Black could throw in this c takes b2, but I guess this sort of aids in white's development. So e takes f6 played, b takes c3, so Magnus is down a pawn, but black's structure is nothing to be proud of. With that being said, black should probably try to complicate matters and put some pressure on white with, for example, queen to a5, because if white were allowed to regain the c4 pawn without much difficulties, then he is simply better. Here, if bishop to b2, then black can continue his initiative with bishop to a3. So Bas is probably just a castle, offering this pawn. Black wouldn't want to capture immediately since he is way behind in development, but at the same time, white might have to place his dark square bishop on a less than ideal square to defend c3. So if bishop d2, this prevents knight d2 and black can safely defend his c4 pawn with bishop to e6. But in the game we see bishop to d6 from Yu. This allows white to regain c4 and just have a better game due to the superior pawn structure. And any ending from now on is going to be favorable for Magnus. So now both sides castle, and Magnus played knight to d2. And I really like this move from Magnus. White is in no rush to regain his pawn, and Magnus plans to maximize the potential of this light square bishop. Development continued normally for both sides. Bishop f3, Magnus finds the best square for his bishop, simply putting pressure on this weakness on c6 while giving his king some extra protection. Bishop a6 from Yu, knight back to e3, and here knight b6. So this temporarily defends the c6 pawn, because if bishop takes c6, then black can play queen d6 with a double attack, and this wins material. So after knight b6, bishop a3 played, simply controlling d6 and renewing the threat of bishop takes c6. So note that knight d5 doesn't quite work. White goes bishop takes d5, and this leaves black with a weak isolated pawn on d5, and here queen b3 gives white the advantage. So bishop a3, black could play his queen to d7, just defending that pawn, also connecting the rooks. But instead we see knight to c4 from Yu, and this is an inaccuracy from Yu. He was probably hoping for some tactical complications, but it puts the knight in an awkward pin, as Magnus played queen to d3. So Magnus could have played bishop takes c6 in this position as well. The computer thinks that this is winning. But I can understand why Carlsen didn't go for this line. You can imagine that if Yu can play his knight to c4 and trade off the knights, then he would have a nice blockade on the light squares. and the light square weaknesses around white's king will then be an issue. So Magnus instead played queen to d3, also a pretty decent move. Rook takes e3 played. So if knight takes e3, this doesn't quite work, and it involves a fair bit of calculation. Bishop takes c6, queen to c8. So everything is hanging here for white. But here white has moved bishop b7. And after queen e8, rook c1, rook b8, bishop to c5, and white wins as this knight is almost trapped. a7 is also hanging as well. For example, bishop b6. And now simply retreat the bishop, which enables white to go back with queen to f1. White is now threatening rook takes c2 because queen to e1 is met with queen to f1. So knight to e1, bishop e2, and here white will be up a piece. So after rook takes e3, Carlsen played rook takes e3. If f takes e3, knight takes a3, queen takes a6, knight c2. If queen captures c6 or bishop captures c6, black can simply sidestep with the rook, and he will soon regain the exchange. So let's say rook a to b1, knight captures rook, rook captures knight. Despite the better pawn structure, this might be difficult to convert for Magnus because of the opposite colored bishops. And with the queens on the board, black has some attacking potential, since his dark square bishop cannot be challenged. So after rook takes e3, we have rook takes e3 from Magnus, knight takes e3 from Yu, queen takes a6, knight c2, rook to d1, knight takes a3, queen takes a3. So it's still opposite colored bishops, but the difference here is that black can always nullify the attack with g3. And with the pawns on f2 and g2 supporting g3, the king is very safe. White is just better in this position. So here queen to d6 played by Yu, banking on opposite colored bishops to save the day. But is this enough? Magnus accepts the trade since h2 is also under attack, so queen takes d6, bishop takes d6, and now we shall witness the endgame technique from the world champion. So if bishop takes c6, then the rook comes to c8, attacking the bishop and also the pawn on c3. And if pawn to d5, black now has a nice blockade on the dark squares. So Magnus played pawn to c4, now rook c8 from Yu, and pawn to c5, permanently fixing that weakness on c6. Bishop e7 from Yu. And now because white has already pushed c4, c5, this pawn on d4 is a little bit weak, and black might have some ideas of rerouting his bishop to f6. So Magnus very sensibly brings his king into the game just to defend that soft spot on d4, king f1. f5 from Yu, king e2. Pawn to g5, so now g4 would trap the bishop. But what black really wants is to take some of the pressure off c6. So Magnus prevents that, h3, king g7, king d3, king g6. And now Magnus takes control of the open file. h5, rook b7, bishop f6, and now rook d7, simply stopping any ideas of rook d8, and also giving Carlsen the option of going rook d6. g4 from Yu. So the bishop is finally kicked off the diagonal, but no problem for Magnus. Bishop d1, preparing to simply reroute to a4. King g5, bishop a4, pawn to f4. So hoping to create a passed pawn with pawn to f3. So Magnus stops that. It does weaken the e3 square. Yu played rook to e8, but Carlsen worked out that this was okay. He played f takes g4, h takes g4. So here rook e3 check doesn't accomplish anything, simply king c4, and white is doing very well in this position. So here we have rook to e6, defending c6. Bishop d1, now rerouting to a better square where it can protect everything on the king side, as well as attack c6. You gave a check. Now rook a3 would be met with bishop to b3, and this rook is nearly trapped. So in this position you play a5, bishop to f3 from Carlsen, rook to a3, now a desperate attempt to complicate matters, trying to play rook takes a2. But Magnus has everything under control. Bishop takes c6, now with two connected passers. Rook takes a2, bishop e4, pawn to a4. Giving a check doesn't accomplish much after king c3, king c2. If rook to a4, then white simply pushes c6 and he is winning. So in this position you tried a4, c6 from Carlsen, rook to a1, pawn to c7, pawn to a3. Now not promoting because of rook c1 check. But here Carlsen played his king to b3. And in this position Yu Yangyi resigned. So white can safely cover this pawn on a3. And his c-pawn will soon promote. For example, rook c1, bishop c2 blocking the rook, a2, rook d5 check, and rook to a5 wins. So fantastic stuff from the world champion. Magnus wins the Altibox Norway Chess with a round to spare. I hope you enjoyed the game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.